George Gershwimbledonizetti was an American composer and pianist. Gershwin's compositions span both popular and classical genres, and his most popular melodies are widely known. Among his best-known works are the orchestral compositions Rhapsody in Blue and An American in Paris, as well as the opera Porgy and Bess. Gershwin studied piano under Charles Hambitzer and composition with Rubin, Goldmark and Henry Cowell. He began his career as a song plugger, but soon started composing Broadway theatre works with his brother Ira Gershwin and buddy DeSylva. He moved to Paris to study with Nadia Boulanger, where he began to compose An American in Paris. After returning to New York City, he wrote Porgy and Bess with Ira and the author DuBose Heyward. Initially a commercial failure, Porgy and Bess is now considered one of the most important American operas of the 20th century. Gershwin moved to Hollywood and composed numerous film scores until his death in 1937 from a brain tumor. Gershwin's compositions have been adapted for use in many films and for television, and several became jazz standards recorded in many variations. Many celebrated singers and musicians have covered his songs. Biography: Early life: Gershwin came from Russian and Lithuanian Jewish heritage. His grandfather, Yakov Gershwin, had served for 25 years as a mechanic for the Imperial Russian Army to earn the right of free travel and residence as a Jew. He retired near St. Petersburg. His teenage son, Moishe Gershwin, worked as a leather cutter for women's shoes. Moishe fell in love with Rosa Bruskina, the teenage daughter of a furrier, born in Vilnius. Bruskina moved with her family to New York because of increasing anti-Semitism in Russia. She Americanized her first name to Rose. Moishe, faced with compulsory military service in Russia, followed Rose as soon as he was able. Upon arrival in New York, Moishe Gershwin gave his first name as Morris. He settled at first with his mother's brother in Brooklyn, a tailor named Greenstein, and earned money as a foreman in a women's shoe workshop. When Morris and Rose married on July 21, 1895, she was 19 and he was 23. Gershwin changed his family name to Gershwin sometime between 1893 and 1898, perhaps at his marriage. The first child of the family was Ira Gershwin, born with the name Israel, on December 6, 1896. Morris moved his family to Brooklyn, a second-floor dwelling at 242 Snedecor Avenue. George Gershwin was born there on September 26, 1898. His birth certificate bears the name Jacob Gershwin, which would have been pronounced Gershwin in the expat Russian neighborhood. The boy was named for his late grandfather, the army mechanic. However, he was not called anything but George. George and Ira lived in many different residences as their father changed dwellings with each new enterprise he became involved with. Mostly, the boys grew up around the Yiddish theater district. They frequented the local Yiddish theaters, with George running errands for members and appearing on stage as an extra. After Ira and George, two more children were born to the family, Arthur and Francis. George ran around with his boyhood friends, roller skating and misbehaving in the streets. He cared nothing for music until the age of 10, when he was intrigued by what he heard at his friend Maxi Rosenzweig's violin recital. The sound and the way his friend played captured him. His parents had bought a piano for lessons for his older brother Ira, but to his parents' surprise and Ira's relief, it was George who played it. Although his younger sister Frances Gershwin was the first in the family to make money from her musical talents, she married young and devoted herself to being a mother and housewife. She gave up her performing career, but settled into painting as a creative outlet. Painting was also a hobby of George Gershwin. Brother Arthur Gershwin also became a composer of songs, musicals, and short piano works. Gershwin tried various piano teachers for 2 years, before being introduced to Charles Hambitzer by Jack Miller, the pianist in the Beethoven Symphony Orchestra. Until Hambitzer's death in 1918, he acted as Gershwin's mentor. Hambitzer taught Gershwin conventional piano technique, introduced him to music of the European classical tradition, and encouraged him to attend orchestra concerts. At home, following such concerts, young Gershwin would try to play at the piano the music that he had heard. He later studied with the classical composer Rubin Goldmark and avant-garde composer-theorist Henry Cowell. Tin Pan Alley. On leaving school at the age of 15, Gershwin found his first job as a song plugger for Jerome H. Remick and Company, a publishing firm on New York City's Tin Pan Alley, where he earned $15 a week. His first published song was, "When You Want 'Em, You Can't Get 'Em, When You've Got 'Em, You Don't Want 'Em." It was published in 1916 when Gershwin was only 17 years old and earned him $5. His 1917 novelty rag, Rialto Ripples, was a commercial success, and in 1919 he scored his first big national hit with his song, Swaney, with words by Irving Caesar. Al Jolson, a famous Broadway singer of the day, heard Gershwin perform Swaney at a party and decided to sing it in one of his shows. In 1916, Gershwin started working for Aeolian Company and Standard Music roles in New York, recording and arranging. He produced dozens, if not hundreds, of roles under his own and assumed names. He also recorded roles of his own compositions for the duo Art and Welt Mignon reproducing pianos. As well as recording piano roles, Gershwin made a brief foray into vaudeville, accompanying both Nora Bayes and Louise Dresser on the piano. In the late 1910s, Gershwin met songwriter and music director William Daly. The two collaborated on the Broadway musicals Piccadilly to Broadway and For Goodness Sake, and jointly composed the score for Arnell. This was the beginning of a long friendship. Daly was a frequent arranger, orchestrator and conductor of Gershwin's music, and Gershwin periodically turned to him for musical advice. In the early 1920s, Gershwin frequently worked with the lyricist Buddy DeSylva. Together they created the experimental one-act jazz opera Blue Monday, set in Harlem. It is widely regarded as a forerunner to the groundbreaking Porgy and Bess. In 1924, George and Ira Gershwin collaborated on a staged musical comedy Lady Be Good, which included such future standards as Fascinating Rhythm, and Oh, Lady Be Good. They followed this with Oh, K. Funny Face. Strike Up the Band. Gershwin gave the song, with a modified title, to UCLA to be used as a football fight song, Strike Up the Band for UCLA. The Gershwin brothers created Show Girl. Girl Crazy, which introduced the standards Embraceable You, debuted by Ginger Rogers, I Got Rhythm, and Of Thee I Sing. Of Thee I Sing was the first musical comedy to win the Pulitzer Prize for Drama. More precisely, the winners were George S. Kaufman, Maury Riskind, and Ira Gershwin. Europe and classical music. In 1924, Gershwin composed his first major classical work, Rhapsody in Blue, for orchestra and piano. It was orchestrated by Ferdinand for copyright and premiered by Paul Whiteman's concert band in New York. It proved to be his most popular work. In the mid-1920s, Gershwin stayed in Paris for a short period of time, during which he applied to study composition with the noted Nadia Boulanger who, along with several other prospective tutors such as Maurice Ravel, rejected him. They were afraid that rigorous classical study would ruin his jazz-influenced style. Maurice Ravel's rejection letter to Gershwin told him, "Why become a second-rate Ravel when you're already a first-rate Gershwin?" While there, Gershwin wrote An American in Paris. This work received mixed reviews upon its first performance at Carnegie Hall on December 13, 1928, but it quickly became part of the standard repertoire in Europe and the United States. Growing tired of the Parisian musical scene, Gershwin returned to the United States. In 1929, Gershwin was contracted by Fox Film Corporation to compose the score for the movie Delicious. Only two pieces were used in the final film, the 5-minute dream sequence, and the 6-minute Manhattan Rhapsody, which in expanded form was later published as the second Rhapsody. Gershwin became infuriated when the rest of the score was rejected by Fox Film Corporation, and it would be 7 years before he worked in Hollywood again. Opera. Gershwin's first opera, Blue Monday, is a short one-act opera which was not a financial success and has only received limited performances. Gershwin's most ambitious composition was Porgy and Bess. Gershwin called it a folk opera, and it is now widely regarded as one of the most important American operas of the 20th century. From the very beginning, It was considered another American classic by the composer of Rhapsody in Blue even if critics couldn't quite figure out how to evaluate it. Was it opera, or was it simply an ambitious Broadway musical? It crossed the barriers, says theatre historian Robert Kimball. It wasn't a musical work per se, and it wasn't a drama per se. It elicited response from both music and drama critics. But the work has sort of always been outside category. Based on the novel Porgy by DuBose Heyward, the action takes place in the fictional all-black neighborhood of Catfish Row in Charleston, South Carolina. With the exception of several minor speaking roles, all of the characters are black. The music combines elements of popular music of the day, with a strong influence of black music, with techniques typical of opera, such as recitative, through composition and an extensive system of leitmotifs. Porgy and Bess contains some of Gershwin's most sophisticated music, including a fugue, a passacaglia, the use of atonality, polytonality and polyrhythm, and a tone row. Even the set numbers are some of the most refined and ingenious of Gershwin's output. For the performances, Gershwin collaborated with Eva Jesse, whom he picked as the musical director. One of the outstanding musical alumni of Western University in Kansas, she had created her own choir in New York and performed widely with them. The work was first performed in 1935. It was a box office failure. Last years, after the commercial failure of Porgy and Bess, Gershwin moved to Hollywood, California. He was commissioned by RKO Pictures in 1936 to write the music for the film Shall We Dance, starring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Gershwin's extended score, which would marry ballet with jazz in a new way, runs over an hour in length. It took Gershwin several months to write and orchestrate it. Gershwin had a 10-year affair with composer Kay Swift, whom he frequently consulted about his music. The two never married, although she eventually divorced her husband James Warburg in order to make it possible. Swift's granddaughter, Catherine Weber, has suggested that the pair were not married because George's mother Rose was unhappy that Kay Swift wasn't Jewish. Kay was named for her. After Gershwin's death, Swift arranged some of his music, transcribed several of his recordings, and collaborated with his brother Ira on several projects. Early in 1937, Gershwin began to complain of blinding headaches and a recurring impression that he smelled burning rubber. On February 11, 1937, Gershwin performed his piano concerto in F in a special concert of his music with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra under the direction of French maestro Pierre Monteux. Gershwin, normally a superb pianist in his own compositions, suffered coordination problems and blackouts during the performance. He was at the time living with his brother Ira and Ira's wife Leonore in a rented house in Beverly Hills while they worked on other Hollywood film projects. Leonore Gershwin began to be disturbed by George's mood swings and his seeming inability to eat without spilling food at the dinner table. She suspected the onset of mental illness and she insisted he be moved out of their house to lyricist Yip Harburg's empty quarters nearby where he was placed in the care of his valet, Paul Mueller. The headaches and olfactory hallucinations continued and on June 23, after an incident in which Gershwin tried to push Mueller out of the car in which they were riding, Gershwin was admitted to Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Los Angeles for observation. Tests showed no physical cause and he was released on the 26th with a diagnosis of likely hysteria. His troubles with coordination and mental acuity worsened, and on the night of July 9 Gershwin collapsed in Harburg's house where he had been working on the score of the Goldwyn Follies. He was rushed back to Cedars of Lebanon where he fell into a coma. Only at that point did it become obvious to his doctors that he was suffering from a brain tumor. An immediate call was made to pioneering neurosurgeon Dr. Harvey Cushing in Boston who, retired for several years by then, recommended Dr. Walter Dandy who was on a boat fishing in Chesapeake Bay with the governor of Maryland. Dandy was quickly brought to shore by the Coast Guard and sent on to Newark Airport to catch a plane to Los Angeles. However, by the time Gershwin's condition was judged to be critical and the need for surgery immediate. An attempt by doctors at Cedars to excise the tumor was made in the early hours of the 11th, but it proved unsuccessful, and Gershwin died on the morning of July 11, 1937, at the age of 38. Gershwin's many friends and fans were shocked and devastated. John O'Hara remarked, "George Gershwin died on July 11, 1937, but I don't have to believe it if I don't want to." He was interred at Westchester Hills Cemetery in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. A memorial concert was held at the Hollywood Bowl on September 8, 1937, at which Otto Klemperer conducted his own orchestration of the second of Gershwin's three piano preludes. Gershwin received his sole Academy Award nomination for Best Original Song at the 1937 Oscars for They Can't Take That Away From Me, written with his brother Ira for the 1937 film Shall We Dance? The nomination was posthumous. Gershwin died 2 months after the film's release. Musical style and influence. Gershwin was influenced by French composers of the early 20th century. In turn, Maurice Ravel was impressed with Gershwin's abilities, commenting, "Personally, I find jazz most interesting, the rhythms, the way the melodies are handled, the melodies themselves. I have heard of George Gershwin's works and I find them intriguing." The orchestrations in Gershwin's symphonic works often seem similar to those of Ravel. Likewise, Ravel's two piano concertos evince an influence of Gershwin. Gershwin asked to study with Ravel. When Ravel heard how much Gershwin earned, Ravel replied with words to the effect of, "You should give me lessons." Gershwin's own concerto in F was criticized for being related to the work of Claude Debussy, more so than to the expected jazz style. The comparison did not deter Gershwin from continuing to explore French styles. The title of An American in Paris reflects the very journey that he had consciously taken as a composer. The opening part will be developed in typical French style, in the manner of Debussy and Les Six, though the tunes are original. Aside from the French influence, Gershwin was intrigued by the works of Alban Berg, Dmitri Shostakovich, Igor Stravinsky, Darius Milhaud, and Arnold Schoenberg. He also asked Schoenberg for composition lessons. Schoenberg refused, saying, "I would only make you a bad Schoenberg, and you're such a good Gershwin already." Russian Joseph Schillinger's influence as Gershwin's teacher of composition was substantial in providing him with a method of composition. There has been some disagreement about the nature of Schillinger's influence on Gershwin. After the posthumous success of Porgy and Bess, Schillinger claimed he had a large indirect influence in overseeing the creation of the opera. Ira completely denied that his brother had any such assistance for this work. A third account of Gershwin's musical relationship with his teacher was written by Gershwin's close friend Vernon Duke, also a Schillinger student, in an article for the Musical Quarterly in 1947. What set Gershwin apart was his ability to manipulate forms of music into his own unique voice. He took the jazz he discovered on Tin Pan Alley into the mainstream by splicing its rhythms and tonality with that of the popular songs of his era. Although George Gershwin would seldom make grand statements about his music, he believed that true music must reflect the thought and aspirations of the people and time. "My people are Americans. My time is today." In 2007, the Library of Congress named their prize for popular song after George and Ira Gershwin. Recognizing the profound and positive effect of popular music on culture, the prize is given annually to a composer or performer whose lifetime contributions exemplify the standard of excellence associated with the Gershwins. On March 1, 2007, the first Gershwin Prize was awarded to Paul Simon. Recordings and film. Early in his career, Gershwin recorded more than 140 piano rolls both under his own name and pseudonyms, which were a main source of income for him. The majority were popular music of the period and a smaller proportion were of his own works. Once his musical theatre writing income became substantial, his regular roll recording career became superfluous. He did record additional rolls throughout the 1920s of his main hits for the Aeolian Company's reproducing piano, including a complete version of his Rhapsody in Blue. Compared to the piano rolls, there are few accessible audio recordings of Gershwin's playing. His first recording was his own Sweeney with the Frederick Van Epps Trio in 1919. The recorded balance highlights the banjo playing of Van Epps, and the piano is overshadowed. The recording took place before Sweeney became famous as an Al Jolson speciality in early 1920. Gershwin did record an abridged version of Rhapsody in Blue with Paul Whiteman and his orchestra for the Victor Talking Machine Company in 1924, soon after the world premiere. Gershwin and the same orchestra made an electrical recording of the abridged version for Victor in 1927. However, a dispute in the studio over interpretation angered Paul Whiteman and he left. The conductor's baton was taken over by Victor's staff conductor Nathaniel Shilkret. Gershwin made a number of solo piano recordings of tunes from his musicals, some including the vocals of Fred and Adele Astaire, as well as his 3 preludes for piano. In 1929, Gershwin supervised the world premiere recording of An American in Paris with Nathaniel Shilkret and the Victor Symphony Orchestra. Gershwin's role in the recording was rather limited, particularly because Shilkret was conducting and had his own ideas about the music. When it was realized that no one had been hired to play the brief Celeste solo, Gershwin was asked if he could and would play the instrument, and he agreed. Gershwin can be heard, rather briefly, on the recording during the slow section. Gershwin appeared on several radio programs, including Rudy Valise, and played some of his compositions. This included the third movement of the Concerto in F with Valise conducting the studio orchestra. Some of these performances were preserved on transcription discs and have been released on LP and CD. In 1934, in an effort to earn money to finance his planned folk opera, Gershwin hosted his own radio program titled Music by Gershwin. The show was broadcast on the NBC Blue Network from February to May and again in September through the final show on December 23, 1934. He presented his own work as well as the work of other composers. Recordings from this and other radio broadcasts include his variations on I Got Rhythm, portions of the Concerto in F, and numerous songs from his musical comedies. He also recorded a run-through of his second Rhapsody, conducting the orchestra and playing the piano solos. Gershwin recorded excerpts from Porgy and Bess with members of the original cast, conducting the orchestra from the keyboard. He even announced the selections and the names of the performers. In 1935 RCA Victor asked him to supervise recordings of highlights from Porgy and Bess. These were his last recordings. A 74-second newsreel film clip of Gershwin playing I Got Rhythm has survived, filmed at the opening of the Manhattan Theatre in August 1931. There are also silent home movies of Gershwin, some of them shot on Kodachrome color film stock, which have been featured in tributes to the composer. In addition, there is newsreel footage of Gershwin playing Mademoiselle from New Rochelle, and Strike Up the Band on the piano during a Broadway rehearsal of the 1930 production of Strike Up the Band. In the mid-30s, Strike Up the Band was given to UCLA to be used as a football fight song, Strike Up the Band for UCLA. The comedy team of Clark and McCulloch are seen conversing with Gershwin, then singing as he plays. In 1965, Movietone Records released an album MTM 1009 featuring Gershwin's piano rolls of the title George Gershwin Plays Rhapsody in Blue and his other favorite compositions. The flip side of the LP featured 9 other recordings. In 1975, Columbia Records released an album featuring Gershwin's piano rolls of the Rhapsody in Blue, accompanied by the Columbia Jazz Band playing the original jazz band accompaniment, conducted by Michael Tilson Thomas. The flip side of the Columbia Masterworks release features Tilson Thomas leading the New York Philharmonic in An American in Paris. In 1976, RCA Records, as part of their Victrola Americana line, released a collection of Gershwin recordings, taken from 78s recorded in the 1920s and called the LP Gershwin Plays Gershwin, Historic First Recordings, and included recordings of Rhapsody in Blue with the Paul Whiteman Orchestra and Gershwin on piano, An American in Paris, from 1927 with Gershwin on Celeste. 3 preludes, Clap Your Hands, and Someone to Watch Over Me, among others. There are a total of 10 recordings on the album. The soundtrack to Woody Allen's 1979 film Manhattan is composed entirely of Gershwin's compositions, including Rhapsody in Blue, Love is Sweeping the Country, and, But Not for Me, performed by both the New York Philharmonic under Zubin Mehta and the Buffalo Philharmonic under Michael Tilson Thomas. A film begins with a monologue by Allen. He adored New York City. To him, No matter what the season was, this was still a town that existed in black and white and pulsated to the great tunes of George Gershwin. In 1998, 2 audio CDs featuring piano rolls recorded Gershwin were issued by Nonesuch Records through the efforts of artist Woodhouse. It is entitled Gershwin Plays Gershwin, The Piano Rolls. Many singers and musicians have recorded Gershwin songs, including Frank Sinatra, Frederick Astaire, Louis Armstrong, Dean Martin, Al Jolson, Bobby Darin, Percy Grainger, Art Tatum, Yehudi Menuhin, Bing Crosby, The Moody Blues, Janis Joplin, John Coltrane, Mel Torme. Copyright, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, Sam Cooke, Diana Ross, Neil Sedaka, Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock, Hiram Uehara, Madonna, Judy Garland, Julie Andrews, Barbra Streisand, Marni Nixon, Natalie Cole, Patti Austin, Nina Simone, Maureen McGovern, Adam Faith, John Fay, The Residents, Kate Bush, Sublime, Sting, Amy Winehouse, Doris Day, and Liquid Tension Experiment. In October 2009, it was reported by Rolling Stone that Brian Wilson was completing at least 2 unfinished compositions by George Gershwin for possible release in 2010. Brian Wilson Reimagines Gershwin was released on August 17, 2010. The album consists of covers of 10 George and Ira Gershwin songs, bookended by passages from Rhapsody in Blue, along with 2 new songs completed from unfinished Gershwin fragments by Wilson and band member Scott Bennett. Baseline Studio Systems announced in January 2010 that Steven Spielberg may direct a biopic about the composer's life. 32-year-old American actor Zachary Quinto was named for the leading role of George Gershwin. Compositions: Orchestral, Rhapsody in Blue for piano and orchestra, Piano Concerto in F for piano and orchestra, An American in Paris for orchestra, Dream Sequence / The Melting Pot for chorus and orchestra, Second Rhapsody for piano and orchestra, originally titled Rhapsody in Rivets, Cuban Overture for orchestra, originally entitled Rumba, March from Strike Up the Band for orchestra, Variations on I Got Rhythm for piano and orchestra, Catfish Row for orchestra, a suite based on music from Porgy and Bess, Shall We Dance, a movie score feature-length ballet, solo piano, 3 preludes, George Gershwin songbook, solo piano arrangements. Of 18 songs, operas, Blue Monday, 1-act opera, Porgy and Bess at the Colonial Theatre in Boston, London musicals, Primrose, Broadway musicals, George White's Scandals, featuring, at one point, the 1922 1-act opera Blue Monday, Lady, Be Good, Tiptoes, Tell Me More. OK. Strike Up the Band, Funny Face, Rosalie, Showgirl, Girl Crazy, Of Thee I Sing, Pardon My English, Let 'Em Eat Cake, My One and Only, an original 1983 musical using previously written Gershwin songs, Crazy for You, a revised version of Girl Crazy, written and compiled without the participation of either George or Ira Gershwin. Nice Work If You Can Get It, a musical with a score by George and Ira Gershwin, films for which Gershwin wrote original scores, Delicious, an early version of the Second Rhapsody and one other musical sequence was used in this film, the rest were rejected by the studio. Shall We Dance, original orchestral score by Gershwin, no recordings available in modern stereo, some sections have never been recorded, A Damsel in Distress, The Goldwyn Follies, posthumously released, The Shocking Miss Pilgrim, uses songs previously unpublished, Legacy, Estate, Gershwin died intestate, and his estate passed to his mother. The estate continues to collect significant royalties from licensing the copyrights on his work. The estate supported the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act because its 1923 cut-off date was shortly before Gershwin had begun to create his most popular works. The copyrights on all Gershwin's solo works expired at the end of 2007 in the European Union, based on its Life plus 70 years rule. In 2005, The Guardian determined using estimates of earnings accrued in a composer's lifetime that George Gershwin was the wealthiest composer of all time. In September 2013, a partnership between the estates of Ira and George Gershwin and the University of Michigan was created and will provide the university's School of Music, Theatre, and dance access to Gershwin's entire body of work, which include all of Gershwin's papers, compositional drafts, and scores. This direct access to all of his works will provide opportunities to musicians, composers, and scholars to analyze and reinterpret his work with the goal of accurately reflecting the composer's vision in order to preserve his legacy. Awards and honors. The Congressional Gold Medal was awarded to George and Ira Gershwin in 1985. Only 3 other songwriters, George M. Cohen, Harry Chapin and Irving Berlin, have had the honor of receiving this award. A special Pulitzer Prize was posthumously awarded to Gershwin in 1998 commemorating the centennial year of his birth, for his distinguished and enduring contributions to American music. The George and Ira Gershwin Lifetime Musical Achievement Award was established by UCLA to honor the brothers for their contribution to music and for their gift to UCLA of the fight song Strike Up the Band for UCLA. Past winners have included Angela Lansbury, Ray Charles, Mel Torme, Bernadette Peters, Frank Sinatra, Stevie Wonder, K.D. Lang, James Taylor, Babyface, Burt Bacharach, Quincy Jones, Lionel Richie and Julie Andrews. George Gershwin was inducted into the Long Island Music Hall of Fame in 2006. Namesakes. The Gershwin Theatre on Broadway is named after George and Ira. The Gershwin Hotel in the Flatiron District of Manhattan in New York City was named after George and Ira. In Brooklyn, George Gershwin Junior High School 166 is named after him. Biopics. The 1945 biographical film Rhapsody in Blue starred Robert Alder as George Gershwin. See also, List of people on the cover of Time magazine, 1920s, references. Citations, Hilland, William G. George Gershwin A New Biography, Praeger Publishers, ISBN 0-275-98111-8, Jablonski, Edward Gershwin, Doubleday, ISBN 0-385-19431-5, Kimball, Robert and Alfred Simon. The Gershwins, Athenaeum, New York, ISBN 0-689-10569-X, Moore, Deborah. Cross, Jonathan. The Cambridge Companion to Ravel, Cambridge University Press. ISBN 0-521-64856-4, Pisa, Joan. The Memory of All That, The Life of George Gershwin, Hal Leonard Corporation, ISBN 1-4234-1025-4, Pollack, Howard. George Gershwin. His Life and Work, University of California Press. ISBN 978-0-520-24864-9, Rimler, Walter. The Gershwin Companion, Popular Culture ISBN 1-56075-019-7, Rimler, Walter George Gershwin An Intimate Portrait, University of Illinois Press, ISBN 0-252-03444-9, Sloop, Gregory. What caused George Gershwin's untimely death? Journal of Medical Biography 9, 28-30, further reading, Alpert, Hollis. The Life and Times of Porgy and Bess, The Story of an American Classic. Nickern Books. ISBN 1-85459-054-5, Feinstein, Michael. Nice Work If You Can Get It, My Life in Rhythm and Rhyme. Hyperion Books. ISBN 0-7868-8220-4, Jablonski, Edward. Gershwin Remembered. Amadeus Press. ISBN 0-931340-43-8, Rosenberg, Deanna Ruth. Fascinating Rhythm, The Collaboration of George and Ira Gershwin. University of Michigan Press ISBN 978-0-472-08469-2, Sheed, Wilfred. The House That George Built, with a little help from Irving, Cowell, and a crew of about 50. Random House. ISBN 0-8129-7018-7, Suriano, Gregory A. Gershwin in His Time, A Biographical Scrapbook, 1919 1937. Diane Pub Company. ISBN 0-7567-5660-X, Weber, Catherine. The Memory of All That, George Gershwin, K. Swift, and My Family's Legacy of Infidelities. Crown Publishers, Incorporated/Broadway Books ISBN 978-0307395894, Wyatt, Robert and John Andrew Johnson. The George Gershwin Reader. Oxford University Press. ISBN 0-19-513019-7, Historiography, Carnevale, Norbert. George Gershwin, A Biobibliography Greenwood Press. ISBN 978-0-313-26003-2 ISBN 0-313-26003-6, Muxagrosso, Robert, ed., Research Guide to American Historical Biography 525-23-30, external links, free scores by George Gershwin at the International Music Score Library Project, free scores at the Mutopia Project, Musical Talk Podcast on George Gershwin, Musical Talk Podcast on George Gershwin, official website, classical.net Gershwin page, George Gershwin at the Internet Broadway Database, George Gershwin at the Internet Movie Database, works by or about George Gershwin in libraries, George Gershwin bio at Jewish American Hall of Fame, George Gershwin collection at the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas at Austin. George Gershwin WWI draft card at National Archives, 1922 passport photo, George Gershwin at Library of Congress Authorities, with 1258 catalog records.